Thank you.
Good morning.
Well, good morning to you.
I am so excited to be with you here in Emerson Hall.
I know it.
Woohoo! It has been years,
Right.
since we've been together in here for our Humanist Hour, The Point. So welcome back to Emerson Hall and our Humanist Hour, The Point, where agnostics and atheist seekers are welcome. Whatever you believe or don't believe, you are welcomed here, and you will experience love beyond belief, or that is our hope. And I hope now I invite you to join me in saying the words of our covenant, which is a promise we make together to each other in this non-creedal but covenantal community. It starts with the word love, and it should be printed in your programs. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. That is beautiful, and I'm so excited that thanks to Earl Goodman, we have a guest from Tulsa, Chautauqua. This morning, Tulsa, Chautauqua brings the past to life by examining the lives of remarkable men and women throughout history. They work with scholars who, building on historical and cultural research, introduce new views on the lives and impact of historical figures. Scholars present in-character performances, workshops, and discussions to inspire new views of the human experience. I know we are all curious to hear about new views of the human experience, and so I will light our chalice this morning, knowing that at times our own light grows dim, and we need the light and love of others to rekindle the flame of truth and peace and passion in our own lives. And so we are thankful for anyone in the past and the present who helps us rekindle our own flame.
Willkommen, bienvenue, welcome. Fremder, étranger, stranger. Glücklich zu sehen, je suis enchanté. Happy to see you, bleibe, reste, stay. Willkommen, bienvenue, welcome. Im Cabaret, un Cabaret, tu Cabaret. Willkommen, bienvenue, welcome. Un cabaret where we love beyond belief. And love is the spirit of this cabaret.
I'm going to read from the life and works of Christopher Isherwood. And when I'm done reading, we will have some silence in honor of those who've lost their lives this past week in our community and in our congregation, holding all their family and their friends, members of this congregation, many of whom knew the people who were killed, were patients of the people who were killed, holding the people of this city, our leaders in this city and across our nation. But first, in a Berlin diary, autumn 1930, Christopher Isherwood wrote, "From my window, the deep, solemn, massive street. I am a camera with its shutter open, quite passive, recording, not thinking. Recording the man shaving at the window opposite and the woman in the kimono washing her hair. Someday, all this will have to be developed, carefully printed, fixed." In his story, Sally Bowles, he described the title character. She was dressed in black silk with a small cape over her shoulders and a little cap, like a page boy, stuck jauntily on one side of her head. I noticed that her fingernails were painted emerald green, a color unfortunately chosen, for it called attention to her hands, which were much stained by cigarette smoking and as dirty as a little girl's. Her face was long and thin, powdered dead white. She had very large brown eyes, which should have been darker to match her hair and the pencil she used for her eyebrows. "Would you like a prairie oyster?" She produced glasses, eggs, and a bottle of Worcestershire sauce. "I practically live on them." Dexterously, she broke the eggs into the glasses, added the sauce, and stirred up the mixture with the end of a fountain pen. "They're about all I can afford." A few days later, I went to hear Sally sing in an arty, informal bar. She had a surprisingly deep, husky voice. She sang badly, without any expression, her hands hanging down at her sides. Yet her performance was, in its own way, effective because of her startling appearance and her air of not caring a curse what people thought of her. Isherwood later wrote, "From 1929 to 1933, I lived almost continuously in Berlin, with only occasional visits to other parts of Germany and to England. Already during that time, I had made up my mind that I would one day write about the people I'd met and the experiences I was having. So I kept a detailed diary, which in due course provided raw material for all my Berlin stories. I wrote the story of Sally Bowles, and it appeared as a small separate volume in 1937. Other pieces were published, and finally, the complete Goodbye to Berlin was published in 1939. Goodbye, indeed. During those years that followed, the Berlin I'd known seemed as dead as ancient Carthage. Then, in the summer of 1951, John Van Druten decided that he could make a play out of Sally Bowles. His adaptation, I Am a Camera, was written with his usual skilled speed and was ready for production that fall. As I watched those rehearsals, I used to think a good deal, sometimes comically, sometimes sentimentally, about the relation of art to life. In writing Goodbye to Berlin, I destroyed a certain portion of my real past. I did this deliberately because I preferred the simplified, more creditable, more exciting, fictitious past, which I'd created to take its place. Indeed, it had now become hard for me to remember just how things really had happened. That is to say, how I had made them happen in my stories. And so, gradually, the real past disappeared, along with the real Christopher Isherwood of 20 years ago. Only the Christopher Isherwood of the stories remained. As we enter into silence, we remember our own stories, real stories, stories from the past, stories for the present. We remember and we record and we tell them from generation to generation to generation. Please join me in a few moments of silence. In 1966, I Am a Camera became the basis for the stage musical Cabaret, which was then filmed in 1972 with Liza Minnelli. Christopher Isherwood is the author, editor, and translator of enough books to tax a good-sized bookshelf, but it was his Berlin stories about a cabaret singer named Sally Bowles that will identify him for most people. A strong autobiographical thread runs through much of Isherwood's writing, particularly in such novels as Down There on a Visit, A Single Man, and Kathleen and Frank, an affectionate portrait of his parents. His memoir, Christopher and His Kind, was published several years ago in 1976. Born in England, he has lived here in the Los Angeles area since 1939. Please give a warm Tulsa welcome to Mr. Christopher Isherwood.
Thank you. You mean willkommen. Let me start off with a reassurance. In order to follow my remarks, it's completely unnecessary to have read any of my books. After all, in the great world, my only claim to fame as a writer is from the musical and film Cabaret, which I didn't write. It was adapted from a play my great late friend, John van Druten, made out of certain parts of my Berlin stories. Someone asked me if I find it maddening that my greatest claim to fame comes from something I haven't actually written. No, I don't find it maddening at all. Any ruffled feelings I might have been soothed by checks arriving. like sort of poultices laid on the throbbing boil of my wounded self-conceit. No, I'm really very grateful to Johnny for writing this play, I Am a Camera. But what I want to talk to you about today is simply this. As a child of my time, I've been concerned with certain themes, which are typical themes of the different periods of my life, and I have written about them. Themes that were fashionable and of the social consciousness or zeitgeist. And one of these themes is that of being an outsider, someone outside the modern conformist world looking in, with passion, with sincere involvement, with heartfelt hostility. I myself am more than usually an outsider in certain respects. I've always liked to live in countries other than the one where I was born, England, in 1904, because there's just this slight remove that makes everything the people around one do interesting, that gives it a faint air of strangeness. After living in this country for almost 40 years, and most of those years as a United States citizen, I can say with satisfaction that I still feel just a tiny little bit foreign. And now, when I go to England, I feel foreign too. So I appreciate England much more now than I did formerly in my years of youthful rebellion against established religion and so on, and against my mother, who was a tremendous counterforce in my life, though we became quite close in later years. My father, you see, was killed in the war, the First World War, near Ypres. He died in May of 1915. I was 10, yes, 10, that's right, nearly 11. And I was in a very difficult position psychologically after he died because the establishment, the people in my school and so on, said, he's a hero. But you see, what was so extraordinary about my father, and what made him infinitely greater than their view of him, was that he was a kind of, he combined being an exemplary officer in the British Army with the most extraordinary kind of bohemianism and liberalism. He was quite a talented painter. He painted watercolors, little landscapes and flowers, charmingly. Oh, but more than charmingly, with real poetry. And he also acted. He was a fearless ham. And quite often in parts where he wore female drag. I mean, real farce. He used to say that one's sword was only used for toasting bread on, and he hated the bang his revolver made, and he never fired it. An eyewitness saw that he didn't have his revolver in his hand when he was killed. He was leading an attack. And when he was in the trenches, he was always knitting. He knitted scarves and things for himself and the other officers. He was rather good at it. And this had the most wonderful effect on the men, in turn, because they said, "Oh, the colonel's knitting," you know, and then they laughed instead of being scared. And so I think that was a function of his heroism. Thinking about my father's character over the years, I eventually wrote a biography of my parents. I began to feel a great bond with a certain kind of anti-heroic hero. Somebody who laughed at the heroic side, but who was fundamentally someone to whom one could look up as a hero. And I think this had a great deal to do with my feeling in later life for the writer E.M. Forster, both as a personal friend and as a writer. It stemmed from this. You see, to me, one of the greatest expressions of the ideal character of the outsider is in an essay by E.M. Forster called What I Believe. I can't quote it from memory, but Forster said, in effect, that in all the gloom which is growing, the only reality, the only thing one can cling to is absolute loyalty to personal relations. This kind of character, to my mind, is the highest type of outsider. In 1939, when I was immigrating to America, on board the very ship, in fact, I was forced to recognize myself as a pacifist. You see, in Berlin, I had fallen in love with a German boy named Heinz, who had been made an unwilling part of the Nazi military machine. And knowing I couldn't kill Heinz, I realized I couldn't kill any Germans. I'm opposed, you see, and I expressed this opposition in the Second World War to the use of armed forces under any circumstances whatsoever. But it seemed to me that I only knew what I didn't want, what I couldn't accept. And this raised the disconcerting question, what were my values to be? I desperately needed somebody to help me do my thinking. Where was I to go? Who would help me? I first met Gerald Hurd in London in 1930. At that time, his chief interests were evolutionary science and the investigation of psychic phenomena. A rather elfin Irishman, he had written a number of books, but his friends agreed that his greatest genius was in communicating to others the fervor of his interest in any subject he discussed. He and his friend Aldous Huxley had declared their pacifism in books and articles. In 1937, they had left England and gone to California to settle in the area of Los Angeles. I had exchanged letters with Gerald, but I very much wanted to have some long talks with him so that I could find out exactly what it was that he had discovered. So I went to California. Now, in the meantime, I had heard rumors that Gerald was devoting himself to the study of yoga. My friends and I laughed over this. We pictured Gerald levitating with Aldous Huxley in turbans and floating out over the desert at a great altitude. But even if the rumor was true, it did nothing to shake my faith in Gerald's basic integrity. For he had the curiosity of the intelligent and a sane skepticism that wasn't afraid to find mud around the well of truth. If Gerald was temporarily involved with yogis or yogas or swamis or whatever they were called, well, good luck to him, I said. It would certainly make a wonderful story at any rate, and Gerald was one of the greatest storytellers alive. I can't recall, after all these years, what it was that I had supposed Gerald to be doing, what it was I had supposed yoga to be all about. But Gerald explained to me that yoga is a Sanskrit word, the ancestor of our English word yoke, and that it means basically union. Yoga is a method, one of several methods, whereby the individual achieves union with the infinite. Yoga, or Hindu philosophy, teaches that there is a part of myself which, being infinite, has access to the infinite. Just as the water in a bay has access to the sea, because it is the sea. One of the reasons I've always liked living in Los Angeles is its proximity to the sea, and the desert. In a way, this part of the country is desert that has been adapted and planted and cultivated, but it's still desert, and it therefore has something of the quality of the mirage about it. But I like that. It appeals to me altogether. Perhaps being a devotee of Hinduism, it seems very much like the Hindu concept of the universe as a kind of projection or maya. So now that I had met Gerald, as a result of meeting him, I had become very involved in Vedanta, or a branch of Hindu philosophy. And the Hindus believe that they have a concept called dharma. And dharma in the Sanskrit language means the duty related to oneself. Everybody has their own dharma, which is to say the duty to what is important to oneself, and which is part of your profession or vocation, like mine is to writing. I would never have taken even an interest in Vedanta, much less been able to understand it, if it hadn't been that I met a most remarkable man, a Hindu monk, a member of a Hindu religious order. And his name was Swami Prabhavananda. Shortly after arriving in Los Angeles, I was introduced to him by Gerald Hurd and Aldous Huxley. And I have to say that it was one of the major experiences of my life, certainly. And we have remained close friends ever since, and am still a student of his. I even considered becoming a Hindu monk myself. But I ultimately decided to follow Vedanta while living outside and writing about the outside world, although I did write and edit and translate a number of texts about Vedanta. After visiting in the late fall of 1940. After I'd been visiting the Vedanta Center for about 15 months, Prabhavananda decided to initiate me. The ceremony of initiation consists of the giving of a mantra by the guru to his disciple. The mantra consists of several holy names, which the disciple is to repeat and meditate on for the rest of his life. It's considered very sacred and very private. You must never tell your mantra to any other human being. The act of repeating the mantra is called japa. It's convenient to use a rosary to measure the japa, one bead for each repetition of the mantra, so that you don't get distracted having to count. My life, by all odds, is much happier now than it has ever been. My relationship with the painter Don Baccardi is indescribable. It has moments that blend the highest camp with the highest love, with the highest joy and delight. I'm much less bothered and tortured by anxiety now, and this is largely due to Don being in my life and Swami Prabhavananda. Of course, when I first met Swami, I had to test him on the one thing that really matters to me. And so I said to him, Swami, I have to tell you, I am a homosexual, and I'm living with this young man. And if he had said, you're in mortal sin, or even stop it, or anything, I would, of course, have not been able to see Swami anymore. He wasn't my man. But what he said was, try to see this young man, how he put it in the Hindu way, was try to see the young Krishna in him. Try to see the God in him. And on one side, this was very stimulating. And on the other side, it raised the obvious question, can one go to bed with God? But he said, you must understand, you must realize that this person is a way of coming to understand that there is something divine in the human being. It's only recently that I've been able to write and speak with the extreme frankness that I do now on the subject of homosexuality. I suppose I was, in a sort of way, moving toward it. My whole concept of life, my whole outlook on life, I came to realize was influenced very much by my homosexuality, more than I had supposed. In a sense, I'm sorry that I didn't just say flat out in the Berlin stories that I was homosexual. Well, that is, the character I called Christopher Isherwood, and that his German landlady called Herr Isivu. But if I had said that Herr Isivu was homosexual, it would have been such a production as a coming out that it would have upstaged all the other characters. It was very important that this observer character be rather sexless. At least that was how it seemed to me at that time. Rather unobtrusive. Just sort of a straight man. I mean no pun here. A sort of a straight man to set up the other people's jokes, you know, to react. But in the late 60s, when I started writing my parents' biography, it was obvious to me that in order to tell their story, I had to make my gayness absolutely clear. And so I stated this fact throughout the book. And then, naturally, when I started to make similar statements on television and in press interviews, and so I find that I have now officially come out. There are certain things you can do when you're old, and one of these is that you can give a certain reassurance, as much as to say, Well, I didn't die of it, so don't... Because underneath all the bold lifestyles and so on, there is still a feeling, and I don't think anybody would deny that, there is still great feelings of fear, anxiety, the dislike of being out of step socially, the dislike of some awful things come back to people from their early education, such as, well, it's a vice, it's insanity, it's wicked, it's against the Ten Commandments, it's something or other. And, it's very hard to accept all of this when you're young and impressionable and so on. I mean, there's something to be done, much to be done, by simply sort of talking about all of this very openly. It may be that what I have done will inject some courage into the souls of some of my timid brethren. If so, good. If not, also good, because I at least feel a certain satisfaction. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Isherwood. Herr Isherwood. Mr. Isherwood has just told me that he'd be willing to answer a few of our questions this morning. So I'm going to just share some announcements with you and see how much time we have left for a few questions. So think about what your questions might be. What a wonderful way to start Pride Month here in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So please know that we at All Souls will be celebrating, we'll be marching in the parade on the 25th. We'll have our massive pride flag on the 27th. Saturday the 22nd, we'll be building the float, so we look forward to some of you helping us with that, and we hope you'll march with us as well. It's an opportunity this Wednesday. I don't think that this has ever happened in the 12 years I've been here. We're having an all-church potluck on Wednesday evening, hosted by our supper club, which is a long-standing tradition of having supper in each other's homes. But to relaunch that, we're doing that here together. So you can meet people who've been involved at All Souls for a long time. You can meet people who've just joined during the pandemic. We've invited our new members to attend the potluck, so hope to see you this Wednesday, the 8th at 5:30. Bring your favorite dish to share. I'm seeing some faces I hadn't noticed before. And register now still for Trivia Night on the 29th. The proceeds from that Trivia Night benefit our All Souls Youth Program and the Coming of Age Pilgrimage to Boston. And please know that our action team is outside notarizing mail-in ballots up until the June 28th elections this month. And if you want any information about getting your ballot or those elections, our action member leaders will fill you in. I think I will let you know that our offering today goes to Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America. They are a fabulous group. It's a grassroots movement of Americans fighting for public safety measures that protect people from gun violence. They work in communities, in businesses, encouraging a culture of responsible gun ownership. They, just like we, know that gun violence is preventable and are committed to doing what it takes to keep families safe. Of course, we're only able to give away our offering every week because of your generous donations to All Souls. So please use, I think there will be white envelopes in the baskets coming around. So if you'd like to make a donation to All Souls, we will gratefully receive this morning's offering now to Moms Demand Action and to All Souls. And then we will entertain a few questions from the audience for Mr. Isherwood. Thank you. Were you in Berlin in the 30s?
I may have been.
You may have.
Because I'm fascinated with the music, especially of the 20s and 30s. That's interesting. Can I ask the first question?
Yes, you please.
Now, Christopher, so can you say a little bit more about, I mean, is it true that you really have never seen cabaret?
Well, I never saw the stage. My partner, Don Bacardi, wanted very much to see it. This was in November of 1966. But I wasn't interested in leaving home to go to the East Coast to see it. The other pull for Don was that just a night or two after the production he was to see, the performance, was Truman Capote's Black and White Ball, and he very much wanted to see that. And he wanted me to come with him, but I declined. So I never saw the stage play. I have seen the film twice, with some trepidation, I must admit. I have to say I have great admiration for young Michael York. He does look very much like a younger, more handsome version of me. But I'm afraid poor Liza Minnelli was totally miscast. As brilliant as she wasn't my conception of Sally Bowles. And as soon as she appeared on the stage of the little cabaret, the Kit Kat Club, it was very clear that she was very much Judy Garland's.
Any questions from the audience?
Your father sounded like a very interesting man. So did you pick up any of his talents, his art, or his style?
Well, I have to say his bohemianism and liberalism I certainly picked up. It was a very interesting process to write the biography of my parents. I was basically making a very close dive into their letters. Because he was in the military, they were writing each other. And my mother had kept a diary from a very young age. And so I relied heavily on their own letters and diaries in writing Kathleen and Frank. And I must admit, my father I had always put into a kind of hero category, a kind of anti-heroic hero. My mother I had somewhat demonized. And in fact, my working title for the book was Hero Father, Demon Mother. But in the process of reading my mother's diaries, this was after her death, I came to appreciate my mother particularly in a new way. And we had become we'd come to an understanding in her later years, but we had a very difficult time when I was young. Oh, yes. She has passed away. Well, her name was Jean Ross. And I asked her permission to publish Sally Bowles because there was some sensitive information about her, and I knew she was likely to be identified. It is true that she had an abortion, and that we were close friends. We were never lovers or even imagined that we might become lovers. She knew that I was homosexual, and she was more like a sister to me. So that's another aspect of that film, Cabaret, that I find rather distasteful. The idea that this character they called Brian Roberts instead of Christopher Isherwood in the film Cabaret would be homosexual, but then go to bed with Sally, and then go to bed with the Baron, and then want to marry Sally. I found very distasteful. It made his homosexuality a sort of obscene, minor affair such as bedwetting. And so I thought that was the wrong note to strike. But my relationship with the real Sally Bowles, Jean Ross, was a close one. She was actually very politically active. She became a communist, and she had a daughter, a very beautiful daughter. And she was not happy with the fact that Sally Bowles was portrayed as so frivolous. She was a very serious-minded woman. She also thought she was more talented as a cabaret singer than Sally Bowles was given credit for being. But she finally was outed, so to speak, as the original of Sally Bowles towards the end of her life, and she did make a Bowles.
Just time for one more question. Last question, please.
I've often wondered why is it necessary to come out, as they say.
Well, when I was young, it was illegal to be homosexual, and when I was trying to get my boyfriend Heinz out of Germany, he was being pursued by the Nazis, and for 2 years we moved from country to country, letting visas run out and then having to move on until he was finally caught and drafted and sent to prison for a time. We didn't see each other for 8 years, and we ultimately became friends. He married and had a son. But it was very dangerous to be identified as homosexual well into the later years of my life. So it was fraught to be out. And so coming out became a political statement that was important in the gay liberation movement.
Big round of applause. Thank you so much, Mr. Isherwood.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm hoping Mr. Isherwood doesn't have to jump into his car, and he'll be available for a few questions after we close our time together. If your light ever grows dim, please seek out the light of friends and family around you. Remember the words, I think, of E.M. Forster, that when all else is lost, we must cherish and be loyal to our personal relationships, because that's sometimes all we have. So as you leave this place, may your eyes see beauty, may your lips speak truth, may your hearts know love, and may your hands do the good works of this world until we meet again.